Yes, our building is an old bond warehouse built in about 1919. And in it used to be a retail, after Bond Race used to be a retail, it used to be Frisco Furniture, I think, for a while. And in the 1980s, it was converted into offices. Um, uh, the building was bought in early 2000s and converted into 2 residential and 3 strata commercial units. So we had there are a total of 5 units, so two residential, 3 commercial strata, and yeah, that's basically the history of our building.
Yeah, great. And so you installed solar probably around the year 2020, and
Yeah,
that was a
yeah,
solar sharing and splitter technology that you installed. Is that right?
yes, yes.
So, what prompted the discussion about solar, and kind of when did that start? Because obviously, it probably was a bit before solar was actually
Yeah,
installed.
yeah. We you know, there are only 2 owners in the building of the 5 apartments, and good friends. The owners are good friends. So we had been talking about making the building energy efficient and had done some actions to improve electricity usage. But one of the tenants that moved in about 2016 was an architect, and he was bidding for government contracts, and having green credentials was very important. So he asked, was there any way that he could pay for an installation of solar on the roof, so that they could have solar in their apartment, in their unit? And we said no, the roofs are shared uh, for all for all the units. So I then started investigating, was there any way of installing solar on our roof, which was capable of being shared across all the units. So that was the origin, and then we did identify a solar sharing company which had that capability. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
So
So,
what I'm saying, it's a single array, and the power generated from that array is split between 5 units.
yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like, the motivation was initially driven by this architect who wanted to green his own credentials or her own credentials. Um, and yeah, how did you then move to discover whether it was even feasible to install solar on your rooftop?
Well, I did a lot of research about solar, and we identified the company and discussed with them what the possibilities were. Um, the important elements of this system is that the solar is distributed to each unit according to an agreed percentage, a prior agreed percentage of access to the solar power. And then each of the units has their own electricity account that this is linked into. So any excess power that they generate from their allocation is then fed back into the grid. Um, and obviously, any power that they use above and beyond the solar is charged through their own electricity account. So that meant we didn't have to be the electricity provider as the building. The electricity providers were the each unit's account holder, electricity account holder, and just the solar was fed into that account.
Yeah,
So just to say, in order to prepare for this, we had to work out what the percentage allocation would be for each of the units, and they're all very different units. There's 2 very large apartments on the top floor. There's 2 large commercial units on the middle floor, and there's a retail unit on the ground floor. And they all have different usages. The middle floor was very high tech. The computer um, used a lot of computing power. The ground floor was a hairdresser, hair dryers going all the time and whatever. And the top floor, of course, was residential. And their main usage at the time was in the evenings, when people came home from work.
yeah.
So what we did, we over 4 months, every day, my husband and I read the meters day and night to work out what the usage was for each of the units for daytime, so that we could, and the allocation was only for daytime because we weren't considering batteries at that stage. So we worked out what the exact percentage allocation should be for each of the units. You'll notice on that graph there's a common area. We excise the common area from the sole share, and that's on its own separate. It has its own independent account, which is not part of the solar sharing agreement. So they then divided the company looked at the maximum solar output, and then we divided that solar output between each of the units according to their usage. And then we allocated the cost of the installation to the owners according to that usage.
Yeah, wonderful. And on this journey, did you kind of encounter anything unexpected? When before the actual panels were put on your roof, and the solar splitter technology was installed as well.
The company did a pretty thorough audit of the building, and we knew prior to it what needed in terms of cabling, what needed to happen in order to implement it. So it was only at the last minute when we went to have a look at the meters, and we had incorrectly understood that upgrading the meters for the building to smart meters would have been the responsibility of each of the electricity companies. However, that was not the case, and our meters had been installed back in its last renovation back in 1984, and it needed a huge revamp. We got an initial quote to, just throw the whole thing out and redo it into a perfect system, and that was about 2/3 of the cost of the total installation. So we got another quote, which was sort of more of a Heath Robinson rejigging of adding the smart meters into the existing system. So we went with that, but that did add about 20% onto the cost of the installation, which we hadn't counted for, but which was then agreed by the owners.
And so in terms of project funding, I mean, did you seek finance, or use a capital works fund or special levies or anything like?
A special strata levy
Mhm.
for the two owners, according to that. The percentage allocation of power was the percentage allocation of the cost. So we had that strata levy, and the strata paid. But then the real question came: how do we deal with the relationship between owners and renters?
Mm.
So the owners had to then negotiate with the renters to increase their rent based on their estimated savings in power from the new system. So then we had to go through an exercise with all the renters to estimate their power savings, and then the owners made a decision about what the rent would increase to accommodate that. And of course, any new tenants that would come in over the life of the system, the new rent would take into account, in part, the cost of the installation. So it was a fairly complicated process.
Yes, sounds that way. But I mean, I imagine that there are benefits that you're now seeing from the solar system.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The predicted output is pretty much as expected, taking into account that the last 3 or 4 years have had a lot of rain and a lot of days which were abnormal, so that the annual output is lower than predicted. But if you have a look at the number of rainy days and all that sort of thing, it's quite in line. During the time, the business case was built on a feed in rate, which of course dropped considerably, from about 9 cents per kilowatt to about 4 to 5 cents per kilowatt. But at the same time, electricity costs have gone up, so that net the benefit has in fact increased from the original calculation.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we, as I say, because most of there's only one owner occupier, we don't see their bills, so we can't actually validate what's happening with their bills. But we did, there were two other problems that arose. One was that with Ausgrid, on our, and that was actually on the standalone system. Ausgrid, for some reason, allocated a tariff which had no feed-in, and we didn't know. The first bill we saw, that's really weird. We haven't reduced our cost. Second bill, why isn't there a feed-in tariff? And the company, the solar company, investigated, and they had given the wrong tariff. So you have to be very careful about those tariffs. The other one was that there was a glitch in the software at one point, which meant that there was no data being fed into the system. So that meant that we couldn't monitor it very well, but it was fixed fairly quickly, that one.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, my final question for me, and then we'll move on to questions from the audience. What sort of advice do you have for other apartment buildings who are thinking about pursuing this shared solar option?
Well, I think it's very suitable for small blocks of units with few owners, because the matter of negotiating between owners is quite, we were in a good situation because we were friends and we were able to negotiate that. But I can imagine that the negotiation of this is quite complicated because of the allocation of cost, and also because of the allocation, the impact on rentals if people are renting their accommodation. So I think small blocks of units very suitable for. The solar company that we used, their system services 5 units. So if you have 20 units, you multiply that by 4. So we actually initially wanted a body corporate to be part of it, but that would have added a 6th. We didn't want to add a whole new system onto the end of it, so we hived that off. So understanding that this, I don't know about all of them, but this one operated in multiples of 5. I think, for us, it's very worthwhile because we feel good about it, and our bills are lowering. But and I think you have to be prepared to spend quite a bit of time in research and following through. But the company we dealt with was really, really good, very accommodating, gave us all the information that we need. So, but it did take quite a bit of time and effort to bed the system down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it does sound like one other piece of advice coming from your storytelling is that you really need that building or project champion for the solar sharing
Yeah,
project.
right.
So
Look, the other thing is, if you're a new block of small units, I think it's easy because the cost is then built in. And particularly if the block of units has, all 2-bedroom units or, something like that, so that the allocation is very simple between each of the units. They all get equal share. For ours, each of the units were different size, different usage. The allocation was quite complex. But if you were building a small block of units, 5 to 10 units, I think it would be quite an easy process.